That's why you needed both those
John
guys.
Canzano, who has written a lot about the Pac-12 the last 13-plus months. Let's leave these up a little bit, Garrett. He had a story released on his site, his newsletter, and the title of it was "The Gun Was Empty, the Downfall of the Pac-12." So this is that's the tweet. I read the article, and here are some of the quotes that stood out to me on just the overall story. The gun was empty. That's how so many smart people can make such stupid decisions. That's from a Pac-12 insider. All right, another one. This is in reference to a conversation with ESPN about trying to work out a TV deal, a media deal. Go down to the one that has the Pac-12 conversation, Garrett. It's like the third or fourth one. So, no, the next one. There you go. So, Pac-12 conversation with John Canzano. This is a source to me. You know what? We told ESPN after the $30 million per school offer back in the fall of 2022, we said we want $50 million, not 30. Then, Canzano, what was the ESPN response and the source? Goodbye.
Yeah, there you go. There's your first mistake. And then once you got the no on the $50 million, do you not go back and say, well, what about 35 and then, 40? And that to me is where when you thought like, well, somebody's going to give it to us. Well, if ESPN told you no on $50 million and they're the ones who have most of the college football, then who is going to give that to you?
They didn't even tell you no. They just hung up.
Yeah.
That's how like ESPN sounds like they were pissed. Like, wait a minute, we're trying to get this moving. And of course, the Big 12 ended up with an average of 31.7, and that's where a lot of the money came from.
Yeah, I mean, that's, unfortunate for them. I feel like we keep, every day new shovel of dirt on the Pac-12 and how they handled all this from every direction. And now even the folks who were really their support system throughout the entire last couple of years are, turning the shovels their direction now. Not that he nor others didn't, along the way make mention of some of the pitfalls and the mistakes that they made, but now it's just glaringly obvious because now they've had so many fractures become public to where you can't tell everybody, no, we got a TV deal coming still. No, we got just trust us. Oh no, y'all are the liars. We've got a TV deal coming, and then just keep doing that and expecting somebody, I guess, to eventually forget about it. No, I mean rent was due, and they didn't have the rent check, and everybody went their separate ways. And now, we're doing the I guess moratorium on them, and so to speak. Not that they're all the way gone just yet, because as we know, there's a lot of irons in the fire with the Mountain West and the ACC and all the stuff that's potentially going on there. But it doesn't surprise me. The hubris has been mentioned as part of their downfall. Just not being realistic has been mentioned. A lot of different things could be mentioned. But, yeah, when that's kind of how it starts off, apparently, is you're offered 30 and they say 50 and you're that brash about it. Well, I'm not all that surprised that that's how it ended up, the way that ended up in the end.
And maybe even though, as even was written in The Athletic, how the networks kind of went back to Fox, to Pac-12 at the end with like mini type offers as far as it. That's why ESPN never got back involved. Fox, because they're so in as ESPN is with various conferences. Now, go back to the Doug Pearlman. He was like the guy brought in as a kind of a consultant, so to speak, on the media deal. Doug Pearlman was way too nice and mild, in my view, said one source with knowledge of the negotiation. You need cold-blooded killers in that business.
Well, that's where the difference between the Pac-12 and the Big 12 comes in. The Pac-12 hired Endeavor, which is an ever gigantic growing company, and George Kliavkoff hired a buddy of his from law school. Like those two, that's where the paths diverge in the woods, so to speak. And so that's why they were able to cut in line, is because Brett Yormark said, okay, who do I hire? Who do I get involved in this to help us with our media negotiation? Well, how about this gigantic company full of people who are, trying to take over the world right now. Let's do that. And George Kliavkoff was like, well, I know this guy from law school. He's pretty good at this. Let me bring him in. And then while I do think you need to keep the circle tight, where the story kind of goes on and says is he kept it really too small. And then it was just, okay, what's going on? What's going on? Well, we don't want too many people, we don't want too many cooks in the kitchen and all that. And that's fine. But it got to the point where nobody who needed to know any information had any until 2 weeks ago.
Yeah, you heard all that. There's always one other person in the room when it comes to the media deals. All right, here's another one. One well-placed conference source. Fox obviously screwed us. I would argue that after the initial ESPN offer in the fall, that ESPN was no friend. No kidding. Goodbye, click. So there's another part of this story.
Well, I mean, look, Fox has got to, they're heavily invested in the Big Ten. Heavily invested in the Big Ten. So when the Big Ten, whose network is owned and run by Fox, took two of your schools, why would you think of them as an ally going in the first place? That would have been tenuous at best. That's where it's like one of those things, if you sat down with somebody during all this process and well, we're going to talk to Fox, and do you really think that they want to talk to you? Because they kind of just told you what they wanted and left a year ago.
Yeah, going back to the comment about how all these smart people, I don't know how that was worded or whatever, but I got the gist of it was, how could you have so many smart people and be making such dumb or just, fateful decisions? And I wish I had an explanation. I mean, instead of maybe mocking people or talking trash, you would have listened a little bit and not just dismissed everything as conspiracy or endeavor-driven or whatever, and you would have heard all of the exact problems that were being laid out that were directly on your doorstep that you chose to, I guess, dismiss as something else, some agenda, and instead, at the end of the day, all the stuff that you were told that turned out to be true. I mean, one thing Canzano pointed out, Bob Thompson, what was he saying to us when he first started to be a guy on this show, and then everybody else started talking to him as well? He was very clear in his messaging about the Pac and what he thought, and Canzano pointed out that at one point in time, way back, he said, what's the Pac-12 worth per school? $30 million. What were they then being offered? About $30 million. What were they demanding? $50 million. And it's read the room, buddy. Read the room. Hey, by the way, Big 12's going to market a year early. Read the room a little bit. Hey, Brett Yormark's being very aggressive at poaching your teams. Read the room a little bit. Hey, the Big Ten's not saying no, and you're trusting them for what reason? We don't know, because they let the alliance fizzle out the moment that they had an opportunity to. Read the room a little bit. I mean, just what more arrows do you need pointed in the direction of where this was headed? But instead, no, let's just dismiss it as a bunch of football fanatics in the middle of the country who are just trying to stir up a bunch of drama where there is none. Really? So, I mean, that hubris, that arrogance, that just, I guess, not hearing what was being said for a long time, and hey, if you want to see a show, you're like, they don't know what they're talking about. Well, Bob Thompson does. Patrick Craig, they have a little idea of how the TV business works. So, at least maybe take into account that there's a little droplet or two of information that could, be, useful. How about call up Bob Thompson, one of you guys, and talk to him yourselves? And maybe they did that. But, yeah, I mean, none of this unpacking is a surprise. I mean, it was all at their feet. And I know there is some element of this, of the Fox part of it and conspiring and things like that it's probably still going to continue to be talked about. But I mean, like we've said from day one, and like we've said, I think every day since all this happened, it's all at their own feet, really. There was a little help, there was a little nudge here and there, but ultimately they had a TV deal in front of them they could have taken, and they thought they were worth almost double what the offer was, and they clearly were not.
And now they're trying to figure out how to survive, and again, it was self-inflicted. And yes, then when you are an injured animal, that's when other animals feel like they can maybe go in for the kill. And that's what happened too.
It also reeks of a company, and I'm calling the Pac-12 a company because this is that kind of a negotiation. But sometimes the heads of companies hire people who tell them what they want to hear and not what they need to hear. And then those companies have problems because they haven't heard what they needed to hear. And I'm not sure the Pac-12 had enough voices in their orbit because, there are a lot of people saying just all over the place what they needed to hear of hey, this has happened to a bunch of other people before you. It's happening to you now. And I think I used this analogy back before. If you've ever seen a disaster movie, the aliens are coming, there's a meteor, the volcanoes are going to come up. I mean, as stupid as the premises are, some of those movies, there's always somebody who's going to the president and going, hey, Mr. President, we have to evacuate. And the president kind of listens to them. And then there's the dude who tells the president, like, no, Mr. President, that guy's a crackpot, and then sends them out the thing, and then the White House Independence, and then the White House blows up, and you're like, oh, okay, well, should have listened to the crackpot, as opposed to the yes man.
Yeah, and it's just it's not even like so much about Big 12 fans or whatever. It's just the writing was out there. I mean, it was very clear. I mean, the discussions, and here's the thing too, is like, we're talking about it, and then at one point, like, when every major media outlet is suddenly talking about, is that not a sign that maybe there's, if you want to dismiss this person or this, avenue or this, show or whatever, like that's fine and totally you're right, even though we know from comments that were made that, people like Kirk Schultz were listening to this show and others. I think when all of a sudden it's Ross Dellinger and it's, Dennis Dodd and it's every single person you can imagine is writing realignment, Pac-12, Big 12, what's going on, four corners, all this stuff, and you still keep acting like nothing's an issue. It's like they're not just doing that for clicks. You realize that, right? Like, I know that's always the accusation when somebody doesn't want to believe something. It's like, oh, that's just for clicks. But no, there's something. You're not just publishing for that. Like, there's something behind that, and that's why the Colorado thing kept bubbling. And I don't know how they refused to see what was right there. As we know, though, there were people that just refused to, no matter what, because of academics. Like, just no matter what the TV money was, they liked their school better, and their partnerships and all of that. How that translated to somehow they weren't going to be able to do any of those things if they were playing football somewhere else never made sense to me. But regardless. It doesn't really matter now. So, yeah, I mean, they can only look in the mirror, and you can point at a couple of other places and say, okay, Fox did this or USC did this, but, I mean, it's all in the mirror.
One more quote to get to from the article. And this one probably, if you're John, this one hurts a little bit. And anything we ever get with whoever is feeding us something, maybe because they want it out or that we are the ones who get the information, you still have to double and triple check that if you possibly can. Pac-12, we heard this all of the time, that certain people were put out there to discuss the Pac-12. Kleofkoff and Robbins at Arizona, who then calls Dennis Dodd. All of that meant something. They were trying to get it out. And so...
Because it came in waves, remember?
Yes,
it would be like the Big 12 would have momentum.
And then Utah.
Yeah, then there was that week where it was like 4 presidents spoke in 1 week, and then 2 weeks went by with kind of quiet, and then they popped up again.
And then Colorado. And then stuff. So we are together. This is Oregon State President Murthy. We are together on this. We've got confidence in the future, the Pac-12, and we know things are going to be good. Canzano then says, I later found out that the Pac-12 commissioner, Kleofkoff, had spent 45 minutes briefing the president of Oregon State shortly before our interview.
See, this is where I feel bad for him, and I don't, in that you kind of think he should have wondered that. But, I mean, again, you get sources that you trust and you go with it. I'm not trying to let him off the hook here, but that stings, is that when you find that out, like, oh, this guy gave me an interview, and then none of it was sincere. It was all party line stuff, and that's why you run the risk of really getting yourself stuck when you deal in absolutes, because there's very few things in the world that are absolute. And that's what was so strange about the people who were absolutists when it came to the Pac-12. And, people who had, again, experienced it other places in the country are like, man, this feels awful familiar. Like, if it walks like a duck and talks like a duck, it's a duck kind of a thing. And it was just like, no. And that was the whole thing. And, here you find out like, oh, no, the Pac-12 has been trying to feed propaganda through you. And that's never a good feeling.
So explain that. I'm sorry, but explain that to me. So he did an interview.
No, the Oregon State president did an interview.
Okay.
And Canzano saying that he later found out that before the interview that Kleofkoff had a 45-minute briefing with her on talking points.
Okay,
now,
I get
for
what
example,
you're saying now.
if a president's going to be on university president, well, there are talking points and they're prepped just like the White House is or whoever, or a senator. But that it was pretty much, hey, we need to get to this, this, and this. It's very much what sounded like happened with Robbins at Arizona when all of a sudden he was out and talking. And he did a lot, and he was always pretty steady with it. But he was out, and it was found out that perhaps that was Kliavkoff. Hey, we need somebody out in front of this, please, just to neuter some of the negativity.
Yeah, I think when the book is written, I know there's various articles now. It will be, that will be one of the things mentioned is why didn't they approach this a little bit differently in the PR side of it and maybe act a little bit earlier and all those types of things. So yeah, I see what you're getting at there now, and that makes you wonder if whatever happens with the Pac-4. And again, we can talk. There's been no action. The ACC stuff that's still brewing out there. We don't know how that's going to work. Obviously, there's the Mountain West and the American, and there's options, but no real super clear path right now. But one of the options is still somehow staying together and being an autonomous 5 for a couple more years, based on what I was reading out of Ross Dellinger's article earlier. Is that a status I believe would maintain for a 2-year period, and then rolls off, and they clearly would not be in a position right now to be in an autonomy 5 moving forward without that maybe a little buffer stretch there. But if you are those Pac-4, I mean, he's still in charge. I mean, I guess he's still the commissioner, so to speak. But if you're going to stay together, then I don't think that's going to be a relationship that stands the test of time, given what all's out there and what we're discussing right now. So, yeah, a lot of moving parts still and a lot to figure out. And I really just remain very saddened for Oregon State and for Washington State and, to a lesser extent, Cal and Stanford, because I think they're going to be presented with better options ultimately, or be better off, than the other two because of their situation. So, yeah, that just sucks that people were getting played.
I just got an email earlier today.